Good afternoon, Nasdaq followers, and welcome to another edition of Nasdaq Spotlight. Joining me today is serial entrepreneur and founder Tyrone Pike. Tyrone, thank you so much for joining us.
And great to be here. Thank you.
So we are going to start by talking a little bit about your most recent company, which is called FileShadow, and it's an app that helps prosumers find files on a multi-cloud platform. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, we look at the content that people place on Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, Adobe's Creative Cloud, and we collect all that, protect it, and allow you to search across all those. So it gives you kind of access. You don't have to remember where you actually last worked on something. We have it, and you can find it. And then we have very advanced search tools that are built into it that look at content and look at both words and images, and they derive information from those images. There's some very interesting vision APIs that are out there, and we mash up those vision APIs so that we can, for example, say I want to find all the pictures that have skiing in them, and then you say, oh no, I want skiing and cross country, and it will then find cross country skiers. All without actually tagging those themselves, without manual tagging, all automated.
That certainly sounds very useful. So who are the users of the platform currently?
Our current target is what we call a prosumer. A prosumer is kind of one step above a standard consumer. These are people that actually have pretty good competence in using PCs, Macs, iPhones, Android devices, and they store a massive amount of data. It's really what most people have described it to us as, it's a big data problem that individuals have. Managing this huge content of files they've had over generations, and they've stored in a lot of different places. People do strategic projects with someone on one place, and then they do another project on another place, and it goes from being very tactical to actually being very important to be able to get back to all that information. So we protect it, we journal it, and journaling is a technical term for saying that we take snapshots of everything that is actually produced, so you can go back and find it. Now, the law enforcement people that we work with love that, and the reason why they love it is that we can actually store the malware as it comes in, and so they can do their forensics on that malware, but they can always go back to the actual original content that hasn't been corrupted.
Now, this company isn't your first take at being a founder. You have founded 10 companies in 35 years, roughly. So let's rewind a little bit and go back to the first company, which you said you were in a New York apartment, right?
Yes.
You started with LAN systems. So today we're very familiar with LAN today, but tell me about when you started it and how that came about.
Yeah, we started back in 1983 in a studio apartment. And we began designing and building local area networks, which, by the way, were not, a term. It was not even a term of art back then. And we then preserved the name LAN Systems, and we ended up designing and building networks for the largest banks and investment banks and law firms here in New York. We grew across the country and over in Europe, and we ended up selling that off to one of the large publishers, printers called R.R. Donnelley, and Donnelley then put that into their entity that did work for automation for law firms, and then we sold the other half of it to Intel, and the Intel half focused on management tools for managing networks, and that became something called LANDesk, and LANDesk became the largest desktop management system in the world.
So certainly sounds like a big win for you, especially
it was
for
very,
your
it was very
first
exciting.
Company. That's great. That's fantastic. So for entrepreneurs who are looking for this kind of course or starting their first company even, what is your top piece of advice, do you think, from that first company specifically that you founded? What were some of the biggest takeaways for you?
The first thing was do your first company as soon as you possibly can, when you have very few obligations to other people, so that you can actually take the risk and not have other people suffer if it doesn't work. Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is, one of the consequences of actually trying, right? And it may take a few whacks at it to actually get something to work. We also were very fortunate because we had an approach where we looked at the very largest companies we were working with and figured out whether we could build something that was kind of a condominium off them. So something that was adjacent, that could be very productive and complementary to what they were doing. Some people thought that was a very dangerous thing because they would then run over us, right? Because we were doing something in their field. We found that as things progressed, that was the style that really was working, and we did things that complemented Microsoft, we complemented Novell, we complemented Hewlett-Packard, CA. These are all companies that we built products, in and around.
And in your philosophy generally about the way that you work as a founder, that I feel is a big takeaway point from you, is that you don't necessarily have to feel threatened by these big companies.
No, you have to find out exactly what they need done and go do that in a way and approach them in a way that is respectful but also aggressive.
So in the process from starting a company and its smaller scale to building to that bigger scale to the point where you sell, what are some of the challenges that people may face, and how do you prepare yourself for that scale while still being sustainable?
Great question. What we learned as we became more sophisticated at doing this, we sold ourselves to some very large companies. If you find yourself inside Tandem Computers, or you find yourself inside of Intel, or other large entities, you find out that they've got lots of infrastructure that actually can make you more productive. So like they have a great legal team, they have really good intellectual property protection, they understand how to do that really well, how to file provisionals and protect things. You also find that they have really great processes and procedures for modeling and projecting what your business is going to be like. Those are all kind of the things. HR turns out to be one of the real skills, because most of these companies, their assets all go home at night, right? There's not some big factory in the back. So you need to really, really be good at recruiting and retaining people. Really most important, because if you don't have great people, you're not going to build great products or great services.
I think it's great that you bring up HR as well, because just yesterday we had an author here sit with us and to talk about how HR can be a crucial backbone to companies that is often just not represented to the degree that it should be, because they do supply the talent that helps things get done. So speaking to that, what departments do you think are most important that founders should pay attention to as they grow?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to have a good idea, right? So no matter whatever you do, if you can't actually conceive up a problem statement and then solve it, that has to happen first. And then around that, you have to make sure that you actually have people that are in touch with the customer base that you're going to go sell to. And you need to sell early to those people and make sure that what you're building is actually, saleable. So early success in sales and marketing with enough technical expertise to actually build the technical product. Get that out, test market that as soon as possible, right? And then as things get better, you need to have really great support. If you talk about people who love various companies and why they love them, you usually come down to whether they got fabulous support. And if the support is really good, and maybe 24/7 if it's a 24/7 style of product, and they can find someone who really understands how to answer their questions, you keep people as customers. So that's really, really important. And then as that moves forward, you then usually need to find a way to take the support people and make them the front line of the new features, because they're the ones that are actually listening to the difficulties that people are having with whatever you're building. And they need to be the first stage in product management. And so you work that, and then product management needs to also be really good at talking with sales and getting out and talking to the customers. But support is always the most important one to feed in the feedback in a positive way and actually view that they're not just complaining about what the product's doing, but they are the actual advocates for change or improvements in the product.
Okay. And then we've so far talked a lot about how you've sold your companies or parts
Right.
of your companies. How do you know when it's the right time or it's early?
That is almost impossible to be good at. And what I mean by that is we watched a number of companies, some of which we were involved with and some that were not, that held on too long and they peaked and then they didn't succeed. And they had some really big offers along the way and didn't take those offers. What we have found in general is that you have to look at what the formation of capital is. And if you realize that there is a much lower cost way to raise the capital you need to grow your business, that's when you actually are doing the buy versus build decision in the larger corporations looking at you. And they'll say, oh, okay, this is really valuable. We need this. And then they will actually be more likely to actually put an offer on the table for you. And at the same time, you have to think a lot about whether you're actually building something that is big enough and able to stand on its own and to be taken public, on the Nasdaq, for example. And several of the companies that I was involved with, we did take public on Nasdaq. So that was a very exciting experience. But we had to get to critical mass. And in every one of those cases, there was an offer to buy the company before it was taken public. So interesting that way.
So good to know. Now, as we're wrapping up here, what is your take on overnight success? In today's media, whenever we talk about entrepreneurs, we see a lot of these top-down looks where we talk about somebody who X amount of years ago worked this blue-collar job and now is a successful entrepreneur, but we don't get to see a lot of what's really in the middle.
Yeah, I think there are people that have had great insight into things and built instant successes. That's one in maybe 10,000 or one in a million. I'm more interested in seeing the person who's in school, maybe drops out of school or whatever, and produces something that grows to be a modest-sized business. That's actually more interesting because you can repeat that model, thousands of times over. And so you could help people to understand how to actually take some insight they have into it. A farmer who needs to know how to do more, optimized watering, right, for example. And maybe someone builds an app, an iOS and Android app to do that, right? Yeah, that's might have been viewed as a small thing you wouldn't have done, but lo and behold, it's been done. Another company that we were involved with was doing advanced smart light bulbs. And, the question was, could they actually exist in, with GE and Philips and all these other ones? We ended up selling it to Philips, right? So that was another example.
So was it complementary in that case then?
It was, but there was also the reality that, they weren't going to be, a light bulb manufacturer. They were going to be the technology that allowed for smart light bulbs to be deployed. So those are just kind of examples. So I think that overnight success is something people should look at, enjoy that someone did that, but think more about the pragmatics of how you build a modest-sized business, right? Because those can be very successful, right? People can have very good lifestyles running a small, family-owned business, right, around understanding something that other people might not have seen. And now that you can do development on mobile platforms such as your phone there or in the cloud, it's much more approachable. So, don't be intimidated by overnight success. That is just very rare.
And final question here as we wrap up. What's your advice to young people who aren't necessarily even on their first company, but they're just looking and aspiring to be a founder someday?
Well, I think the single most important thing I can say to the college students, high school students that I talk to every week is look at what is not being served. And there is such a massive amount of underserving of different market segments. And it doesn't take a genius to think about an underserved market and then to build a simple app on Android and iOS, right? I mean, literally, you can do it as a single individual and go see if that actually serves.
So starting at that scale. And
Start really small. Just go try something, see if it'll be have any uptake in the marketplace, don't be worried about failing. And given that these things are now incredibly inexpensive, the toolkits that are required to be able to build on, Apple iOS devices and Android devices and in the cloud, this is very approachable. If I think about the cost of doing business when we started in 1983, the costs were incredible. Just the cost of getting a phone system in was a huge thing. Getting, any wired connection was a very expensive thing.
I can only imagine.
And so now we build, common workspaces, and you get mashups, and you put, companies together overnight. That's a pretty exciting thing. Raw materials exist; they're much more available, and I just recommend that everyone, if you've got an idea, go test it out. Go build a prototype. Go ugly early is the way I would say it.
I like that. All right, so here's to going ugly early and testing it out. Tyrone, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Really enjoyed being with you.
And Nasdaq followers, stay tuned for some more programming from South by Southwest.